Alright, I'm Digital Native. I'm back with the second in the set of videos that I'm doing on FX sends and applying sidechain effects, compression, EQ, etc. to your FX sends. So previous one I looked at piano and what you can do with that. So if you've not seen that one yet, I'll drop a link below. But what I'm going to look at in this one is drums. So I've got a basic drum loop loaded up. I've not done anything with it. So let's just have a quick listen to that. So I want to add a little bit of reverb to that. I want to just add a little bit more life to it. So I've used on this one, the round. So I've just added a basic reverb on there. Again, that's the only thing I've got on there at the minute. Ignore these sends at the moment because we'll get to those. Let's just hear that with the reverb. And without. So it's just adding a little bit of life to it, which is cool. As with the last video where we looked at the piano, we're kind of now stuck with that in that it's now kind of baked into the signal. So we can do some EQ on it and we can try and remove any sort of resonances or any sort of maybe nastiness that might be introduced by that reverb. But unfortunately, by doing that, when we're using a reverb in this way, we're then affecting the original sound. And with drums being such an integral or central part to a track, if you start doing any EQ just because of the reverb that you've put on it, obviously that's not a good thing. So as I did in the last video, I loaded up an EQ and what I've done is just boosted some of those key frequencies that were coming through. So things like the snares, hats, things like that. So it sounds awful now. Obviously, you wouldn't apply this type of EQ. But you can see it's bringing through some resonances, and those things are obviously going to be exaggerating what's going on in the reverb in that case. But what I've done, and I did this on the piano, is I sent it to a reverb send. So I've got those pre-fader so that this is not affecting the signal at all. It's just sending a straight signal, and then I can operate that in terms of a wet dry level from the reverb channel. So I've pulled that down a little bit and I've tried to get a match for that. So if I just go on there and turn those things off. So I've got the same sound going, tried to set the level pretty much the same, exactly the same settings for my reverb as I had. The only thing I've changed again is I've turned that up to 100%, so it's fully wet, and then I'm controlling it with this to decide how much that I need. Now what I've done is if I just open that up, this is a carbon copy of the EQ that I added there, where I just found all those resonances and those sort of sounds within the drums that was sort of the main sort of body of the sound. Added it to there, and then I used the invert function to just flip those and then cut them out. And what that's going to do is that's cleaning up the reverb signal, as well as a bit of a low cut that I've put on it, which I've put up to about 255. Again, you can go high with that. That's up to you. These are things to sort of tweak and adjust to taste, really. So I just turn that off. It's very subtle, but it is making a difference, and it's just pulling out those key areas there. So the easiest way, is if you've got a listen function, is to listen to that reverb by itself. So that's what we're getting with no EQ. We're getting a lot of bass. And with. Just take out that low cut, so we're just focusing on the other bits. So you're getting some kind of quite resonant sort of frequencies. They're not particularly pleasant, and if anything, they're probably going to be causing a little bit of phasing and affecting your sound, and it's just going to be clouding up and mudding up the mix, which is why we're trying to do this. We're just trying to do things that can clean up where we don't need any of that extra sort of mud and cloudiness in the mix. we mix that back in. And if we then compare that back to what we did before, just mute those, go back to my original drum track. What it's letting us do is maybe get a little bit more reverb out of what we're doing, but without it clouding it up. So you can even have a little bit extra because you're removing those resonant sort of frequencies and those nasties, and you're taking out that low end. You can actually get away with having a little bit more, maybe, without it getting in the way of the actual sound that you're putting it around. But as with the last example, when we looked at piano in the last video, what I've done, let me just make sure I've turned all that from there. Yeah. What I've also done is set up a send which is going into a compressor on there as well. Now, this is something that you can do. You don't have to do that. But again, it's another way of getting the sound to duck out of the way and sort of clearing a little bit of its space so that the reverb is just sitting around the sound that you're using rather than sitting on top of it or clouding it. So if I just open that up, I've sent the drum channel full break into there. So we're still getting the reverb, but what it's doing now, and if I give you a quick listen on that, it's just dipping out. So what we're doing is we're getting the reverb tail, but we're not getting it affecting the initial impact of it. And what that's going to do is just bring a little bit more focus to the actual drums, rather than your sound being created sort of maybe more of the reverb. Because what you can do is you can start adding reverb to something and it sounds brilliant, but actually a lot of the sound is coming from that reverb. And if you're thinking about things being good in mono, if you've got a lot of your drums in mono and you're adding a reverb that sounds brilliant, and then a lot of the sound is coming from that, as soon as you put it into mono, you're going to lose a big chunk of what your sound is. So you need it to sound good. The drums need to sound good on their own anyway. And then the reverb or the other sort of bits are just giving that extra little bit of sparkle. You don't want your main sound necessarily coming from it on something like drums. So by doing this, you're cleaning that up a little bit. And then you know that you're getting your good sound from your drums and that extra little bit from your effects. And you know, if you do these things sort of early on, you know that any decisions you're making after that are based on, you know, knowing actually what's going on rather than end up endlessly tweaking and changing levels of stuff because of issues you've got with your like reverbs and stuff like that. So it just cleans it up just that little bit. Now, you might be wanting to do that over one full break, but what I've also done, and I looked at chopping up of breaks in the first video that I did a little while ago. I'll link that below as well. But what I've done is I have chopped up that break into its individual parts. So I've got kick, snare, hats. Again, this is something that's preference. It's up to you, whatever fits your workflow. But again, any of these things that I'm sort of showing are really down to having control, really. So certain things that you do are going to increase the control that you're going to get down the line. So by chopping this break up, what I've got is essentially I ended up with duplicate tracks of everything. So I've got the same things going on, but now I've got a reverb send for each one of those. So what that enables me to do is I can set up the reverb in the same way. I've got the same single reverb send. It's all still going into this channel here with the same reverb. It's got the same EQ going on. So I can still leave some of those things on it. But what I'm getting now is I've got a separate track and I can then choose the level of each one that I'm sending to it. So that's not currently set as pre-fader. So I'll just change that. So what that means is we can do the same thing again, only we're just getting that again, that extra little bit of control, because maybe I want a little bit more reverb on the snare or in the hats, and maybe I want less in the kick, or maybe I don't want any in the kick at all. So in which case I can just turn that off completely. So then what I'm only getting is reverb on the snare and the hats. So if I go into the kick, I could maybe turn that off completely. And have it switched on for the other two. So then I can decide individually how much reverb that I want for each. So I'm just getting an extra little level of control over what I'm doing there. Obviously, by chopping them up as well, that's going to give you the extra control in terms of how you make each individual hit sound. So then you can then go in and clean up a break, or you can do certain things to it, compress it, affect it in different ways as well. So yeah, that's just an extra little thing that you can do there. And again, with the reverb send, you can then choose, if I just bypass that, you can have another send set up in a similar way, but instead of sending everything to a compressor at the same level, you could have these switched on for your sends to the compressor. And again, you can choose how much you want to be ducking each one. So maybe you don't want to be ducking the reverb when the kick hits, or maybe you don't want to be ducking it with the hats. Maybe that's going to cause, because obviously if you do it on a whole break, what it's doing is it's going to be dipping every single time anything happens in there. But by separating it, you can choose what you want it to be dipping on. So maybe I'll turn that off on there. Maybe I only want it to be dipping when I'm using the snare and not on the kick, because I'm not even giving any reverb to the kick. So now I'm just focusing on that snare. And if I go into the compressor, you can see it's just ducking every time the snare hits. So I'll pull it all the way down so it's extreme. And obviously what you can do, you can add auto makeup gain, so obviously that's going to then push the signal back up a lot more depending on how much compression you're giving, so that might give you interesting effects as well. So again, like I say, it's giving you that bit of extra control, and what you get in there is you can get a massive reverb on a snare without it clouding up the initial impact of the snare. And when you're chopping up in this way, you also get that big reverb without it affecting the other things, or maybe just affecting them a little bit or in different ways. So yeah, that's about it for that one. Like I say, if you've not seen the first video, go back and check out the one about the piano. I look at similar things, but just looking at how you would do that on a piano. I'm going to do another one where I'm going to look at this vocal track below and just look at how we can do some similar stuff on that, but how that might be specific to vocals, how you can get a huge vocal reverb going without it actually clouding the original signal, keeping that original sound nice and focused in the mix. Okay, thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos, again, just click subscribe, hit the like button, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.